How to deal with Donald Trump 2.0. Back in office for less than 3 weeks, and the great disruptor has created awkwardness for allies with his extraordinary idea of a US-owned Gaza Strip. The idea was hardly embraced here, but the careful response from the two sides of politics was telling. I'm David Speers. Welcome to Insiders. Parliament returned for the year on Tuesday. There were predictable arguments over cost of living and a deal done on hate speech laws. Along the way, Labor capitulated on mandatory sentencing, while the coalition was ridiculed over its tax-free lunch plan for small business. Then along came Donald Trump, demonstrating his capacity to disrupt everything, including Australian politics. The US president's proposal to take control of the Gaza Strip and relocate Palestinians broke decades of settled policy. It sparked anger and confusion around the world. Peter Dutton hailed Trump as a big thinker. Anthony Albanese didn't want to comment much, but neither is rushing to endorse the notion of an American-owned Middle East Riviera.
Federal Parliament returns today in what could be the final sitting week ahead of the election.
Very excited.
Yeah, it's a big year ahead.
Are you on the roll?
Praying for divine intervention?
Well, it's nice to be here on a bipartisan basis.
I think the sermon that we've heard today, Hope in an Uncertain World, was appropriate.
President Trump has said that the US should seize control of Gaza and permanently displace its entire population.
Everybody I've spoken to loves the idea.
This is extraordinary, to put it lightly.
This could be so magnificent, the Riviera of the Middle East.
That was a political earthquake, 9.5 at least on the Richter scale.
You are the greatest friend Israel has ever had in the White House.
We've seen this from the president before. Say something provocative, put an extreme idea on the table.
Trump's comments have provoked anger from around the world, whether it's from allies or enemies.
In order to sort of move the window of what's acceptable and possible.
This is an out-of-the-box idea.
It's forced displacement. It's inciting to commit forced displacement.
Let's give every chance to every option that's put forward, to give it consideration.
Our position has been long-standing and bipartisan. 2 states in the region.
Do you still support a 2-state solution?
Yes, I do.
I'm not going to respond to every statement every day that is made. I'll determine, and my government will determine, Australia's position.
They must be allowed home. They must be allowed to rebuild, and we should be with them in that rebuild.
Gaza says Palestinians must be allowed to rebuild, return to their homes in Gaza.
What do you think a 2-state solution is?
Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
My guest this morning is Finance Minister Katy Gallagher. First, let's check what's making news. Australian women will save hundreds of dollars a year on various health expenses under a pre-election pitch from Labor being announced today. The $573 million package includes cheaper contraceptive pills and hormone replacement therapies, more generous rebates for long-term contraceptives, including IUDs, and Medicare-funded menopause assessments. We'll talk to Katy Gallagher about that shortly. Support for Labor has nosedived in one of yesterday's state by-elections in Victoria. Labor's primary vote was down 16.7% at the close of counting last night for the seat of Werribee in Melbourne's west. It's the sort of territory where the federal election will be won or lost. But few of those votes went across to the Liberal candidate, whose vote was only up 3.7%. Labor may still hold the seat. Neither major party was able to crack a primary vote of 30%. Better news for the Liberals in the other by-election that was held yesterday. They've had a win in the inner Melbourne seat of Paran. They won it back from the Greens. The Greens' primary vote was down less than 1%, so not much, but they weren't getting preferences from a Labor candidate this time. The Liberal candidate instead scooped up those preferences to secure a narrow win. And finally, Hamas has released 3 more hostages as part of the ceasefire deal with Israel. Looking frail and malnourished, the men were paraded and made to give statements thanking their captors. The scene has angered many in Israel and raised more questions about the fragile ceasefire. Donald Trump's Gaza gambit may also complicate the ceasefire agreement. And so before we get to the panel, I want to bring in the ABC's Global Affairs editor, John Lyons, for his take on how this is all playing out. John, thanks for joining us this morning. So we had the announcement which, shocked many from Donald Trump, then a bit of walking back by the White House, then a bit of doubling down by Donald Trump again. So a few days on, what's the status of this proposal?
Well, David, it's still out there, and it's worth actually looking at the context of what happened the other day, one of the most remarkable press conferences for many years in the White House. The two men now, one of them, Donald Trump, his own predecessor, Joe Biden, said that Israel had indiscriminately bombed Gaza. Tens of thousands of bombs and missiles have hit Gaza over the last 15 months, following, of course, Hamas's atrocities of October 7. But for 15 months now, Israeli jets and American bombs have essentially reduced Gaza to rubble. It's now unlivable. As Donald Trump himself says, it's a demolition site. So when the two of them appeared next to each other, with one of them, with Donald Trump actually saying, I've come up with a plan, essentially it involves moving out the transfer of Palestinians to somewhere to be decided at some later point. And then we will take ownership, we will take control of the Gaza Strip and we'll turn it into a remarkable real estate development. That caused shockwaves around the world, particularly in the Arab world, but I think all around the world, because it's been an article of faith now for decades. American presidents, Australian prime ministers, that the two-state solution, which is what the United Nations agreed on in 1947, which Australia championed then under Doc Evatt, that was suddenly completely thrown out. But that proposal, it's been resisted and opposed, but as far as the US president's concerned, it's still a live proposal. So
you mentioned some of the global reaction. I saw you immediately after the Trump press conference with Netanyahu. You said the reaction of Saudi Arabia is going to be critical. Just to explain to us why and what their reaction has been.
Well, David, Donald Trump said to journalists, listen, I think Jordan and Egypt will agree to this, even though they have come out strongly and opposed it. What he's saying there is the realpolitik of that is that without United States military and other funding, the current regimes in Egypt and Jordan simply wouldn't survive. What's happened in Syria recently, the falling of Bashar al-Assad, is also possible in places like Egypt and Jordan. So Donald Trump has a huge leverage over those two, and he knows it and he'll try to use it, although they've both come out strongly against this. At the end of the day, he can probably strong-arm Egypt. Jordan, maybe not so. The Queen of Jordan in particular is absolutely strong on this issue. And so if Jordan says no and Donald Trump insists or pulls funding from Jordan, that can see the collapse of Jordan. But the key to this all, it's Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is the power player at the table. The Americans and the Israelis want one thing, the glittering prize in the Middle East at the moment. It's not about the Palestinians. It's about normalisation of relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia. That would unleash tens of billions of dollars of commerce and trade across the Middle East and overnight turn the Middle East into an economic powerhouse. That's the prize that Israel and the United States are chasing. That's all up to Saudi Arabia now. And if Saudi Arabia says no to this deal, they have so far, it won't happen. They are the difference between the end of a two-state solution and the continuation of that idea.
And just finally, John, what about you make the point that we haven't seen progress for decades when it comes to a two-state solution. It's been talked about, but hasn't happened. The situation's obviously appalling on the ground there. What about those who say, well, we need a bit of out-of-the-box thinking. Maybe this is a negotiating tactic that could deliver some good. What do you think about that?
Well, David, I've seen the commentary that, look, this is maybe the beginning of a good conversation. If this is the beginning of the conversation, then I think the world should be very wary about what's the end of that same conversation. John Howard in 2006, when he was Prime Minister, said very clearly Australians want the fighting to stop, and the root cause of the problem is still, in the whole of the Middle East, is still the settlement of the Palestinian issue. And John Howard was right in 2006. Those words remain true. The alternative to that is to lock the Middle East into decades of confrontation.
John Lyons, really appreciate that. Thank you. Well, Donald Trump certainly put friends and allies of the United States on the spot when he announced this the other day, including here in Australia. So let's see what the panel thinks of it. We're joined by Niki Savva, Sakkal and Samantha Maiden. Very good morning to all of you. Let's start with Anthony Albanese. Niki, his reaction to this was very careful. He kept saying, I don't want to provide a running commentary. He clearly doesn't want to poke Donald Trump in the eye, but he did also make it clear that he still supports that two-state solution.
Well, I think that's right. The government has taken a strategic decision. They're not going to buy into every piece of chaos that comes out of the White House. And apart from anything else, the situation changes very quickly over there. Trump will say one thing one day and it changes the next. But
just on that, sorry to interrupt here, but Anthony Albanese kind of made that point himself. He was talking to News Breakfast about what Trump had just done in the days prior when it comes to tariffs.
Yeah.
There's been two different positions in the last week on Canada and on tariffs. And that points towards the need to sit back, not comment on every statement that is made every day.
Yeah, so Niki's basically saying Trump says one thing but might do another.
Well, look, it would be futile and exhausting to follow Trump up every drain pipe and down every sewer. So I think the government has to be really careful in the way that it responds. And they did that the other day when they said, you know, we're not going to comment, but this is our position. Yeah. We still favour a two-state solution. Now that was
which is a homeland for the Palestinians, not an American-owned Gaza.
Exactly. And that was a very clear response if you listen carefully to what they say. I thought Dutton was a bit more ambiguous on that front.
We'll come to Dutton. But just on the Prime Minister, Paul, do you think it needed to be stronger on something like this?
I think people on the left, and you saw the Greens immediately seek for him to be stronger. I think my reaction when I saw it was it made sense to not play into it. As Niki says, you're not going to chase him down every unusual idea because that just generates days of unwanted attention. Perhaps he could have more strongly stated what a two-state solution meant in terms of the kind of article of faith around a Palestinian homeland. But I can understand him wanting to move on from it. A key part of this, from the people on the left and right who want to buy into Trump's plans either way, is that most Australian politicians realise that this is an issue that most Australians don't want to see them play in, and that's what's on the Prime Minister's mind.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's true that you can't chase Trump down every rabbit hole, but Sam, this was a big one. This does run counter to decades of Australian bipartisan policy on this as well.
Well, I think I remember seeing someone, I can't actually remember who it was now, suggesting that he should have cancelled the press conference and come up with a complete position on what Donald Trump had just said. I don't agree with that, but I do think that some of this just comes down to basic political communications and messaging. I think there's a little bit too much of telling people how the sausage is made or saying the quiet part out loud when you give a press conference where you say, I'm not going to provide a running commentary, but then you actually provide a running commentary. I think you can leave out the first bit. And he had the same problem on a radio interview where he tried to say the same thing. You simply say, well, what I can tell you is that our position hasn't changed, which we support a two-state solution. You just say it. That's it. Obviously, we'll be taking a look at what Mr. Trump has to say, but that's our position. And I think that it just projects a bit of weakness when you're saying we're not going to provide a running commentary, but then you're providing a running commentary.
Yeah, look, Peter Dutton then, he also supports a two-state solution still, but he went out of his way to praise Donald Trump's deal-making, his big thinking. He was far more effusive of Donald Trump than certainly Anthony Albanese was, and also open to the idea that, well, we need to have some bold thinking on this particular issue.
If we do want a better life for Palestinians, we have to accept that here we are in 2025, nothing to this point. Not the great work that Tony Blair did or that Bill Clinton did or the Bush 43 and 41 sought to do, and before that has worked. And so let's give every chance to every option that's put forward to give it consideration.
We are stuck right now, right? The situation hasn't changed for a very long time. You know, it is the fact that there's shock and awe in this statement, and I think Greg Sheridan described it as bonkers. But at the end of the day, there is the problem in getting the Arab nations to get involved, to take more refugees. You know, I think it was Dave Sharma that suggested Australia's formally taken more refugees than you know...
Than some of the neighbouring countries.
Some of the neighbouring countries.
Yeah. Formally, but some of them are there.
Obviously they're there.
Yeah, but it's a question of what happens to them while Gaza is rebuilt, because it has to be rebuilt. A lot of it is unlivable, as John was saying. But back to Peter Dutton, Niki, what did you make of how he reacted to this?
Well, I thought he was much more ambiguous than the Prime Minister. I thought it took him a little while to get around to saying that, yes, they still supported a two-state solution. I thought probably in diplomatic speak he was doing a big suck-up to Trump before he got around to actually saying what he thought. But he has left an opening there. We need to think about this. That's what he was saying, because nothing else has worked. Well, that's all very well, but I think, as John Lyons very clearly pointed out, there are such dangerous implications involved from what Trump is proposing that everybody needs to tread very, very carefully following what Trump has said.
Absolutely. Look, Richard Marles, Deputy PM Defence Minister, he was in Washington yesterday meeting his counterpart, the new Defence Secretary, Pete Hegseth. Apparently, from what we know, didn't raise or didn't seek any clarification on the Gaza position of the Trump administration, but he did secure well, probably the strongest commitment we've heard from the Trump administration supporting AUKUS. Here was Pete Hegseth yesterday.
The president is very aware, supportive of AUKUS, recognizes the importance of the defence industrial base, which the Deputy Prime Minister pointed out, the investment Australia is willing to make. It enhances our ability in the subterranean space, but also our allies and partners. This is not a mission in the Indo-Pacific that America can undertake by itself. It has to be robust allies and partners. Technology sharing and subs are a huge part of it.
I'm pretty sure it's the underwater, not the subterranean space that we're talking about here. But look, that's a strong endorsement of AUKUS. I think a lot of people would still like to hear Donald Trump say it, because while his hand-picked cabinet secretaries might say it, we know that ultimately it's what Trump thinks that really matters. And nonetheless, that would be very welcome for Australia, wouldn't it, Paul?
Well, Pete Hegseth is all about preparing for real war, and AUKUS is part of that plan for the US. I mean, this is great news for Australia. Miles has done a good job to get over there quickly and secure something on AUKUS. Penny Wong was over there very quickly at the
Miles took a fat check with him too, didn't he? The first payment
that would
from
help.
Australia.
Yeah, having a bag full.
500 million US.
Little 800 mil.
Yeah. Just $700 million tends to make everyone smile, I suppose.
And the government wants to show that there is not much of a gap between the US and Australia on any policy issue, but that's where the Gaza thing is tricky for Labor, because it shows there is and if this plan continues, I mean, Trump is meeting with the Jordanian king next week, King Abdullah. There's talks about meeting the Saudi foreign minister soon. So if this plan develops, he's driven a logjam through an issue, Trump. There's no coherent plan on what comes next, but he's tried to he's tipped over the table, and he said, let's bring heads together and see if we can do something revolutionary and transformational here. It could all come to nothing and be a disaster, but as John Lyons points out, there is leverage that he has over a number of those key Arab states. I think that leaves Labor in a tricky position. If this continues and talks go on, can Labor even hint that they're open to seeing this deal be done if there is no Palestinian statehood at the end of it, which would be a breach of one of its faiths? It's easier for Dutton to signal openness to it, because Palestinian statehood, while it's technically their policy, takes 3 or 4 questions to him to actually get him to state it.
To say that. Yeah. But equally, we still don't know exactly where this Trump idea is going to settle, because we keep getting these
or how. I mean, will the Palestinians be able to stay in their own homeland? And if they're not, what does that mean for the future stability?
Well, the White House has suggested it would be a temporary relocation, not
nothing.
permanent. So It's difficult to know.
But yeah, I mean, but the main thing is they need to get rid of Hamas. Like, I mean, you can't have.
How do you do that is also part of the difficulty. Well, time to talk to the Finance Minister, Katy Gallagher, who's also the Minister for Women, Government Services and the Public Service. And to take us there, here was her colleague Anne Ali's reaction to Donald Trump's Gaza proposal.
Stephen, talking to Palestinians in the community and to the community more broadly here in Australia, there was a real sense of shock and a real sense of real concern that, you know, this could mean that there would, basically an eradication of a Palestinian state when we've long held the principle of a two-state solution with a right of return and self-determination for Palestinian people.
Katy Gallagher, welcome to the program.
Thanks, David.
So were you also shocked at Donald Trump's proposal of a US-owned Gaza?
Well, I think President Trump has made it clear that he's going to do things differently. And we're seeing some of that play out, you know, post him coming to office again. But I think really there's been statements made since that initial remark too, which from the administration. So I think the Prime Minister was right to, you know, confirm what our position is, which is a two-state solution that supports the rights of the Palestinian people, the State of Palestine and the State of Israel to coexist peacefully.
Does that mean you don't support the idea of an American-owned Gaza?
Well, we've made clear what our position is, a two-state solution, and that the conflict in the Middle East is resolved as soon as possible and peacefully and in accordance with international law.
But surely you're able to say whether Australia thinks it's okay for another country to take control of Gaza.
Well, I think, again, the Prime Minister's been clear, two-state solution, and that all matters are dealt with in accordance with international law. That is Australia's position. It's a bipartisan position, I think, and that's the one that we had last week before the statements from President Trump, and it's the one that we hold now.
And this wouldn't be consistent with international law?
Well, if you're talking forced displacement, David, that is not consistent with international law. So our position is and has been very clear and consistent and remains consistent, and it's a bipartisan position in this country. I understand Peter Dutton has confirmed his commitment to a two-state solution as well.
Is there any fear of upsetting Donald Trump in how the government here reacts to these sorts of things?
Well, we'll always make our decisions based on Australia's national interest. Obviously, it's an important America's an important strategic partner. Our closest ally has been for decades through different administrations. We will make decisions in our national interest, and we will navigate the relationship and President Trump's presidency in accordance with those principles.
Just another thing on what President Trump has done. As you mentioned, there's been a lot going on in the short time he's been back in the White House. His executive order ending diversity targets. It's now seen Google, Meta, Accenture drop some of their DEI policies and gender quotas, for example. They're worried about losing contracts with the US government, but it does affect their global operations, including here in Australia. As Minister for Women, does that concern you?
Well, we've got arrangements in law. The Workplace Gender Equality Agency has requirements for businesses to report against certain targets and measures, so that will continue. And I note all of those companies that have operations in Australia have confirmed, of course, that they would continue to operate with Australian law, which does allow for reporting and for progress to be made, particularly around issues of gender equality. And as an employer, I guess for us in the public service, you know, we have measures where we want to see more First Nations people attracted and retained in the public service, more people with a disability from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, and make sure women are getting fair opportunity, because we think that's a good employer, and we're all searching for talent, and we know that people, you know, the services we provide as a public service are stronger based on the makeup of your own workforce.
Let's turn to the announcement today on women's health. There are a range of different measures there. Why have you chosen the measures that you have?
Well, I guess Jed Carney, who's been leading this work for us, has been consulting for the last couple of years. We're doing quite a bit of work to unpick areas where women are either paying too much or not getting the healthcare support that they need, and it's come down quite obviously for anyone who's, for women across the country, the use of contraception, going through different stages of your life, including menopause, that these are areas that either haven't been addressed for decades or haven't been met appropriately through the Medicare system. So, we've landed the hospital deal, keep investing in the public health system. We've got a lot of initiatives about strengthening Medicare, and this builds on that.
I think when you say they haven't been dealt with for decades, a lot of women would agree and say, hallelujah. Why has it taken that long?
Unclear. I mean, I guess when there are contraceptives, if we're talking about the oral contraceptive, it's been on the PBS, but not the newer oral contraceptives, which often have less side effects and work better for some women. So there are options on the PBS, but probably not the best options. So that's why we are making sure that we're dealing with that, adding those new drugs onto the PBS. It'll give women more choice and cheaper access to these kinds of products.
The opposition's immediately backed this morning. Do you welcome that?
Well, yes, I do. I mean, we know that Peter Dutton's wanders around saying he's going to cut a whole range of things. He's clear that he sees a lot of our investments in Medicare as wasteful spending, but these are really good investments into women's health. And it'll make a difference for millions of women across the country, including women who are going through menopause, who really have felt left behind by the health system. And hopefully these new measures will address all of those issues.
I mean, the ABC's reported, yes, women want to see these sort of measures, but also when it comes to IUD procedures in particular, they want more help with the pain management as well, that can be very expensive. Obviously, consultations are expensive as well. Is there still a case for more to be done?
I think when you look at health, there's always more to be done. We know that particularly Medicare, after a decade of Liberal neglect, is really heaving under pressure, and we're trying to fix that in the first couple of years of this government. There's definitely more to do. But, longer Medicare rebates, better training for GPs about IUD insertions and removals, and those pelvic pain clinics are part of that. And they are all initiatives that we've got up and running and are investing in this first term.
This is in part in response to a Senate report last year that called for action on some of these things. There's another Senate report that you've had for more than 500 days now when it comes to abortion or access to abortion services. It did recommend expanding access in federally funded public hospitals. Will we see the government respond to that before the election?
Yes, so those reports, both of the reports, the one into reproductive choice and also into perimenopause and menopause, we will respond to this week. Part of us finalising our response has been linked, obviously, with us making some decisions about the investments we want to put in women's health. On the issue of termination of pregnancy, I mean, one of the big changes we've made is greater access to medical terminations, and we've seen very good, we've seen improvements and increases in the access, so better access to medical terminations. We've also done that, as I referred to earlier, that big $1.7 billion investment into public hospitals. They're run by the states and territories, that really is a decision for them about access to surgical terminations in those facilities.
Okay, but did you just indicate there will be more from the government this week on access to termination services in public hospitals?
Well, not beyond what I've just said to you. Right. We've made the investment into public hospitals, so they're funded to do the job that they need to do, and those state and territory governments make decisions there. Our area of responsibility is to make sure, in terms of medical terminations, that the right support is there. And as I said, in the last few years, we have seen improved access to medical terminations.
But this Senate report did say all public hospitals within Australia should be equipped to provide surgical pregnancy terminations or timely and affordable pathways to other local providers. Will that happen?
Well, that is a matter for the state and territory governments. We don't tell them what to what services that they do or don't provide.
It used to be Labor policy that you would.
Well, that was There is a policy in 2019. Our policy now is to fund the public hospitals properly. State and territory governments make those decisions about what services are offered. Here in the ACT, for example, surgical terminations are free and provided, and in most jurisdictions you'll see access to medical terminations, including support services for women that want to access them. Now, you're also the Minister for Finance. You have to make all of this add up ultimately. So today's announcement, $573 million, is that a 4-year figure or a 1-year figure? It's a 4-year figure, so it'll be over the forward estimate. And then there's the $1.7 billion announced the other day on hospitals. That's a 1-year. That's a 1 year, okay. So look, this is on top of, I think it's $17 billion in new spending that the Prime Minister rolled out over January while travelling around. Are there any offsetting savings to pay for all of this? Well, we're working on the budget now. We've had savings at every budget, every budget update, every MyEFO. So you'll see that continued approach. We've found $92 billion in savings across the budgets that we've been responsible for, and I think that shows you how serious we are about it. But it also means we've got the budget in better shape, debt's lower, and interest payments on the debts are lower, so that we can invest in areas like women's health. That's the whole point of finding savings. But the spending generally has continued to increase. Your latest budget forecast was for spending to hit 27.2% of GDP next financial year, the highest level in 40 years outside of the pandemic. Will it now be even higher based on the spending that we've seen over the last month or two? Well, if we're talking about some of the announcements, they've been factored into our thinking and published through the mid-year economic update that we released in December. But there's been more since then. So again, we are finding where we can find savings, that is offsetting new spending. But I would also say, David, the budget is under significant pressure, and it's in those areas we've talked about before, so NDIS, defence, hospitals, aged care and government debt. They are the 5 big areas of pressure. We've made good reforms on NDIS and aged care, so that'll help over the medium term. We'll see those impacts improve the budget. And areas like defence, where we've had to make additional investments in our national interest. Peter Dutton is concerned about the growth in the public service. He says it should not rise above 200,000. I think your budget says it will get to 209,000 this financial year. Is there a point at which it is too big? Is there an upper limit that you would suggest for the public service? Well, I think the public service is well resourced now to do its job. It's taken us about 2.5 years to get it to that point. But Peter Dutton's saying he wants to sack 36,000 staff from the public service, and that would have us return to robo-debt, it would have us return to contractors and consultants running the show, and it would mean poorer services for people. Because the areas we've invested in are those frontline services, and we're making a difference. Like veterans, for example, waiting over a year to even have their case considered, all of that, the backlog of 42,000 veterans claims, all of that is allocated now, and it happens because we've put people in the right jobs to do the work. But is 209,000 enough? Would 220, 250,000 be too many? Well, I've said, I think we've resourced it properly now. Like, I think we have got... So it doesn't need to grow beyond 209,000? I don't believe so. And I've looked at this pretty carefully. Again, I've come into a public service that was weak, under-resourced and had a lot of problems, and it wasn't delivering services for people, which is the whole purpose of having a public service. And so we've gone systematically through each department. Now, Peter Dutton likes to stomp around the country and say, "I'll cut 36,000 jobs from Canberra." The reality is, if he does that, it's people out in the regions and other places right around the country who will suffer. Sounds like you are planning to hand down a budget in just over 6 weeks. Well, we're doing a lot of work, David. Right. A lot of ERC meetings at the moment. The usual schedule you'd be doing at this point? Well, it's a March budget, so we're in the thick of it. There's a lot of ERC meetings. Jim and I have worked over the summer, the Treasurer and I, to make sure that we're getting the job done. But as you would expect, it's a pretty busy time for the Treasurer and Finance Minister right now. It sounds like it. Look, just a couple of other issues. Labor shifted position during the week on mandatory sentencing, under pressure, of course, from Peter Dutton. The Labor Party's platform makes it very clear. Mandatory sentencing, quote, does not reduce crime, but does undermine the independence of the judiciary, leads to unjust outcomes and is often discriminatory in practice. Why do you disagree with your own party platform? Well, we don't apologise for trying to get the best and strongest laws through the parliament with the most support possible. I mean, we've led the way on the hate crimes legislation. Remember, we had Peter Dutton running around trying to weaken those in relation to 18C, and also voted against our doxing legislation, anti-doxing legislation. So we wanted this legislation to come to be as strong as possible and have as much support as possible across the parliament. I think that's what the country expects and needs, and we're responding to issues, you know, horrific and awful rise of anti-Semitism across the country that I have never witnessed in my lifetime, and I think it's appropriate that the parliament responds to that.
But is there any evidence that mandatory sentencing works?
Well, I think you have to govern for right here, right now.
What does that mean?
And, well, what we're seeing right now is the rise of anti-Semitism. This is not Australia. This is not the Australia I know. And I think sending a very strong deterrence to anyone who's contemplating it, thinking about it, taking part in it, is absolutely appropriate.
So you think it'll work?
Well, the laws are there now, David. The Parliament's had its say, and it passed, and indeed it passed with tripartisan support, with the Greens backing it in through the Senate on Thursday.
Just a final one, those state by-elections I mentioned in Victoria yesterday. I want to ask you about Werribee in particular. I know it's a state by-election, but Labor did cop a big hit with its primary vote down 16.7%. What message do you take from that?
Well, you know, obviously we are politicians, so you have a look at what happens, state by-election. I mean, I don't think it changes anything for us federally. We're focused on cost of living, you know, making sure we're building a better future for Australia, and I think the contest will be really clear at the election. It'll be, you know, plans to invest in Medicare, our plans to do that, and to support Australians through the cost of living pressures. Or the other side, which wants to cut $350 billion, slash the public service, build nuclear reactors all around the country sometime in the future. That'll be a real choice for people. Okay. But
this, just to pick up what you said, this doesn't change anything for Labor?
Well, because our plans will remain cost of living, providing help where we can, getting on with doing the things we need to do in Medicare and in infrastructure and working with state and territory governments, and we'll continue to sell that message and invest in those services. And I think the contrast between what we're doing under Prime Minister Albanese's leadership and what Peter Dutton is threatening to do with cuts will make a real choice for people at the election.
All right, Katy Gallagher, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks very much, David.
We are going to talk more about those by-election results, both in Werribee, in the outer west of Melbourne, but also Paran in the inner city of Melbourne as well. Let's get back to the panel, though, for more on what we've just been discussing. Niki Savva, Sakkal and Samantha Maiden. Just want to pick up on the announcement today, these various measures to deal with women's health issues, whether it's contraception, whether it's menopause and so on. Niki, we saw the opposition immediately back this in. What do you think politically about what is clearly a pre-election pitch to women that Labor is wanting to do more for them?
Well, it's certainly one of Labor's strong suits, right? And they've gone out of their way all the way through to promote women's causes, whether it's equal pay and now addressing women's health issues. And clearly that sets up a contrast with the Liberal Party, because that's been seen not to have done so much, although they were quick today, I think, to come out in support of that.
Yeah, and Sam, the specific measures here, as I indicated there, a lot of these women have been waiting many, many years to see movement on.
Oh, look, I think it's completely long overdue. And in terms of like Australia internationally has less women using long-form contraception than probably, you know, we should. Like IUDs are really good. But just in terms of the cost, because I think this is poorly understood, whether you're talking about IUDs or whether you're talking about abortion, that she said she'd have more to say about. Right now, if you have a healthcare card, so you are low income on, you know, Centrelink or whatever, the absolute rock bottom price that you will pay for if you get RU486 prescribed over telehealth, so not, you know, physically seeing a doctor, is $278 plus $71 for the medication, so it's over $350. With a Medicare card, it's $277 plus $47. The rock bottom that you'll pay for RU486 in a clinic like Murray Stopes is $580. That's with a healthcare card, right? And for a surgical abortion, the rock bottom price at Mary Stopes is $740. And if you don't have a Medicare card, like if you're an overseas student or something, it's about $1,000. So these are very, very expensive
That's really interesting.
procedures to have.
Yeah, today's announcement doesn't go to these things. Do you think they might do something on those?
Well, they should. I mean, like,
486
obviously the People's Republic of Canberra, we have a rather large deficit, but we do have free abortions. But just in terms of even the cost of getting IUDs, you know, like with a healthcare card, you know, with it can still, implants are a bit cheaper. They're about $30. But even with a Medicare card, you know, copper IUDs $100, hormonal IUDs like Marina, I assume $31 with a Medicare card. It's expensive, and it's more expensive than it should be. The endometriosis clinics are a fantastic idea. News.com's run a big campaign on that issue to improve access.
So they're rolling out more of those under today's
announcement.
announcement.
And so I think that there's a lot of positive things about these. There's obviously a political angle as well, which is they want to make the point, they want to run the scare campaign over Medicare with
There'll
Peter
be more
Dutton
this week
and
on
talk
that.
about what he did when he was health minister.
And all those numbers you point out, and lots of doctors can't do IUDs, they're not trained to do it. It just goes to show this is not kind of, to Conservatives who might be watching, like there was a fight between Peter Credlin and Andrew Clennell, which you guys informed me on earlier this week.
The voting with our vagina debate.
I wasn't going to say it, but it just goes to show this isn't performative feminism from the government. It's tangible, concrete policy that makes the lives of a crucial voting bloc easier. And they've got 10-point leads among women in key categories on Albanese versus Dutton. So this cohort is crucial to Labor winning the election. It's a massive part of the kind of modern Labor electoral coalition.
All right, well, we'll see the further announcements that are coming this week, and no doubt further pressure on Peter Dutton over his record as Health Minister. The past week, though, in Parliament, a couple of things worth noting. Peter Dutton, the coalition, went into Parliament with a new announcement that they'd made during the break, and this was the tax-free meal and entertainment expenses for small businesses, claiming up to 20 grand. They sort of clarified not alcohol, not golf days and so on, but lunches. Still, Labor had a lot of fun with that in Parliament, including the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers.
This is the only kind of policy that could have been agreed at the tail end of a very long lunch, Mr Speaker. You can imagine them sitting around with the blue teeth and the soy sauce on the tie, coming up with the big ideas.
Real Les Patterson
I was about
image.
to say that myself. It's the Les Patterson.
So, look, there was a lot of back and forth, and every Labor minister, no matter what they were talking about, found a way to work in a gag about lunch. Jason Clare had some good ones as well. How did the policy look at the end of the week, Paul?
Yeah, I think Liberals looked at this week and thought there was a bit of risk in it for Labor because they reckon in a lot of seats that policy is working for them, and small business people like the idea of it. But I think what it did for Labor, it was the first policy in a while, maybe in this term of government that I can recall, where they've quickly and sharply turned something around in the coalition. Labor looked like a media unit that was, you know, fighting to win government. There was a little bit of misleading chatter about it.
The suggestion this would be corporate bosses.
Yeah, but it's kind of a catchy vehicle for Labor to run the argument, which they've been trying to run for a long time, that Liberals are a policy-free zone, that their front bench isn't ready for government, that they're the Morrison government leftovers, and they're just not a serious enough operation.
Wasn't this also about trying to really kick the Libs in the shins on the idea that they're standing for the working class, which Peter Dutton's, you know, been a great lengths to try and do.
Good old-fashioned class warfare.
As well.
Everything played into that, including the cost, and whether this was actually a sensible policy to go ahead with.
Well, there's definitely an argument, though, that bigger companies can do this already, right? They can
have a board lunch.
So there's an argument that I think for some small businesses, you know, like if you were running a plumbing firm and you could take the blokes out to go and have a cannery, like it's not a, you can see why there'd be lots of...
But why? I mean, the fringe benefit, because it's eminently routable, right? The thing is, it's eminently routable. The Libs have not said what will be allowable and what won't be allowable.
Well,
There's no clear.
Have strippers.
They haven't released, huh?
They said you can't have strippers, Niki.
No strippers, no golf,
booze.
I think.
No golf and no strippers.
Well, that's...
Well, that leaves a whole lot of other things.
What are we going to do, Niki? Because we love
a whole lot of other
look,
things.
To Niki's point, I spoke to someone in Treasury.
But no
we said the
funding.
concern is what is a work lunch and what's not. That's they're worried about the rorting that might happen.
And they haven't announced their costings, and they say a few $100 million.
Yeah.
Well, Treasury, using the parameters that the Libs actually put out, have said it could be between $1.6 and $10 billion, depending on the take-up.
Yeah, I think the 10 billion.
I think the 10 billion might be overstretched. But look, I thought it was good to see
how are they
Jim
going to pay
Chalmers
for
The 10 billion was
stepping
rubbish,
up to the plate and actually having a bit of fun with it.
They
right?
weren't talking much in Question Time Labor about their shift on mandatory sentencing, though. We heard from the Minister there. Paul, you wrote yesterday that Mark Dreyfus, the Attorney-General, had to be overruled on this one. What happened?
Yeah, well, I thought in your interview with the Minister, it was pretty incredible that when you asked whether these laws would be effective, she couldn't really say yes. She said the laws are there. That's a pretty incredible thing for a Minister of a government to not be able to support a very important policy they just put through. Yeah, so
is that because there isn't much evidence that they actually work?
Well, all legal experts don't believe it will work, but I mean, legal experts are not right on everything.
During the Howard years, one of the biggest blow-ups was actually about mandatory sentencing. So, you know, it is obviously, a big debate about whether or not...
But Mark Dreyfus
I just don't think it was worth the fight. In the end, it wasn't worth the fight.
Yeah.
And although I'm pretty sure that Dreyfus would have preferred that it didn't happen, he's a political realist, and, you know, his view would have been, well, there's no point still continuing on that.
The bottom line is,
given
though,
the
that the Labor Party
circumstances
had to
at the
do
moment.
this because they've been perceived as so weak on anti-Semitism.
I mean, Mark Dreyfus is, clearly going to say this is not a great idea, you would expect, inside the room.
Yeah, he felt very strongly about it. He's had a career of opposing laws such as this, where there's government overreach into how the judiciary works. So he got overruled. The Prime Minister wanted to make a call before he got on the plane to go to Townsville to end this issue, to stop fighting with Dutton on the issue of anti-Semitism, to just hopefully move on. He's a fight-avoiding Prime Minister at this point, just trying to move through the issues he wants to talk about.
Fight-avoiding.
Wedge-avoiding, I think, was the word that Gareth Evans used. I'll just read out a text from an MP, which I got yesterday. A major backflip on a very controversial matter to Labor people, contrary to the platform, rushed through late at night over the wishes of the Minister without Cabinet or caucus discussion. In earlier times, this behaviour would have cost a Prime Minister their job. So some people feel extremely strongly about it. A lot of others
but not
are just
strongly enough to go on the record.
Yeah.
No.
What a win.
Yeah. A lot of others are
person to man or lady up.
But so the caucus process, there was a caucus committee that ticked it off, but not a full caucus meeting to thrash this out, right?
There was very little notice given for MPs to come to a caucus backbench committee on the Wednesday after Dutton's office had already heard from the Prime Minister that they wanted to do this.
I demand that Paul Sakal's secret texter expose themselves. Come out of the cupboard.
The by-elections, they're two and they're quite different. Werribee, so these are state by-elections in Victoria, right? So they're not federal by-elections, but this close to a federal election, obviously. I can't tell you how many federal MPs were texting me before and after. They're all watching this very closely. Werribee is your classic outer suburban seat, and this was held by Labor with a pretty safe margin of over 10%. They've copped a big hit on their primary vote. They still might win the seat, Niki, because that vote didn't shift across to the Liberals. It did a little bit, but not much.
Look, it was a pretty shocking swing against Labor of almost 17%. But
and they can't ignore that.
No, and they'd be crazy to ignore that, and so would federal Labor. I mean, there are obviously problems in Victoria with Labor, but the fact is,
deeply unpopular right now.
Yeah. It's a deeply unpopular, ageing government, and doesn't seem to be able to handle issues very well. Even so, the Libs only got 3% of that, and it doesn't look as if they will pick up the seat.
That's the number there of the primary vote. Yeah. So look, that Labor vote that tanked sprayed around to a lot of other candidates, and eventually, some of that came back to the Liberals, but they may not pick up the seat.
They may not pick up the seat, and if Peter Dutton is to get even into minority government, he needs to make headway in seats like that.
So what does this tell us? Voters aren't happy with Labor, but they're not loving the Liberal brand.
They're disappointed with Labor, but they've got doubts about the Liberal Party.
Daniel Andrews will be laughing all the way down the Kingston Heath golf course this morning. Look at the mess he's left. There are people in state Labor talking about the longevity of Jacinta Allen today. This is a massive thing.
Well, they could get rid of her before the next.
There are people
election.
wondering whether she can last. I'm not saying that's widespread, but that chatter has begun. That's like an end of government type swing against a government. But the Liberal Party's incompetence, and they are probably the most incompetent political party in the country, the Victorian Liberals, can't capitalise. And seats like Bruce, Dunkley, Hawke, Holt at a federal level are similar in some ways to Werribee. The Libs don't have much presence in these areas. But if Dutton wants to form majority government, he needs to win some of those seats.
The other sort of massive swings, right? Like, this is the dream for Peter Dutton, because we keep having these polls that keep saying that, you know, maybe they're on 51, maybe they're on 52. But then when you count down the seats and the swing, they're only getting to 10 or 11 seats and they need 18 or 19. So if you could get that sort of volatility happening in outer suburban areas, you know, they need that, you know, and I definitely think that they're going to do, you know, they're going to pick up seats in Victoria, which traditionally it's been such a Labor stronghold.
The other one, just quickly, Paran, inner Melbourne. This was Greens Liberals contest. The Libs have won it back from the Greens. It's a bit complicated to read too much into this, I think, because Labor didn't run a Labor candidate. The bloke who ran for Labor last time ran as an independent. He didn't preference the Greens. That hurt the Greens. The Greens' primary vote didn't move much. It was down less than 1%.
No, but the Greens are still on the nose, right? I mean, why didn't they...
Why didn't they do better?
Yeah, why didn't they do better?
And why do you think that is? Is this a backlash over their position on Gaza or something else?
I think there's a lot to do with that. I think standing up with the CFMEU is another big issue. That people, you know, would have been put off by.
And this is Monique Ryan territory federally. This is Kooyong and also McNamara, Josh Burns' seat federally.
Yeah.
Does it say much to them, do you think?
No, because I think the Greens are one thing and the Teals are quite another. And I think the Teals are much more moderate and much more in tune, really, with the people in their electorate. And it's not going to be easy. I'm not saying it's going to be a shoo-in for the Teals, but you tend to think that they will do a lot better than the Greens are doing at the moment.
Acknowledging the complications with the no Labor candidate, I still think Liberals will be really pleased that they can have a strong showing in the cities of Melbourne. That's a really important result for them. And on the Gaza issue with the Greens, I think it's not... Their lack of momentum is not just because of the Gaza issue, it's because of what they have not been able to focus on as a result of focusing too much on that. I think they've lost momentum on their housing and cost of living message.
Just very quickly, Keith Pitt, Sam, you broke the story, quickly followed by Paul. I'm not sure if someone was running
Not that it's a competition.
Not a competition.
Not that it's
She scolded me on the phone.
I did. I rang him up. I said, what are you doing? Take that exclusive off. What's the solar on? I've had this story up for an hour.
The former National Minister has been appointed by Anthony Albanese. He left Parliament at the end of the year, has been appointed Australia's ambassador to the Vatican, to the Holy See. Why has Anthony Albanese picked Keith Pitt?
Well, exactly. It's a bit saucy, isn't it? It's a bit interesting because when he quit, he said he had this incredible job opportunity that he couldn't tell us about.
Pretty sweet gig.
He didn't tell us he'd been around the back of the bike sheds talking to Albo to get this job. But I mean, it's interesting as well because it will obviously restrict him from campaigning in that seat, and while it is quite a large margin. But anyway, you tell us.
Well,
we're
running out of time.
Well, the PM and Keith Pitt have been mates for quite a few years. Yeah. They've caught up even when the PM has been in his new role. He goes to his seat when he goes through Queensland. He's been to a pub and had an event there, so they like each other. And I think the PM likes these kinds of insider games to mess with the opposition.
I think as someone in
Kevin Rudd did it as well.
Wants to mess with their heads.
Mess with their heads, yeah.
All right, our panel, Sam Maiden, Paul Sakkal and Niki Savva, back in a moment with some final observations. Time now for Mike Bowers and Talking Pictures.
I'm photographer Mike Bowers and I'm talking pictures this morning with cartoonist for the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, Kathy Wilcox, and a very warm welcome back.
Good morning, Mike. Good to be back again.
Election year, it's the calm before the storm.
Yes, it's sort of like a big, it's like your HSC, you know that you're going to be having to work extra hard.
Yeah, it's just over the horizon, it's just nearly there. Fiona Katauskas has the first day back at school. The coalition here seems to have its tail up because of the new school captain poll. Yeah. Happy new election year, Albo.
there's going to be a bit of sneering and swaggering. And who's this bearded young fellow in there? James Patterson.
James Patterson. And they say a week is a long time in politics. If he's going to be the school captain, he should tell us if he's going to steal the lunch money, shouldn't he?
He's going to be campaigning on the free lunches at the tuck shop. That works to get school captain every single time.
Mark Knight seems to think there's a new king of the bus.
I really love this cartoon. I feel like Mark Knight has been there. No matter how cartoonists present in adult life, the likelihood is that they were the bullied ones when they were young.
So he's probably channeling the bully. First week back sitting, and there was a lot of jockeying for position. You can tell that the shadow of the election was all over Parliament as they tested their lines, I think, on each other and where they were going to be and how they were going to position themselves. And the sun was wandering around the House of Reps during question time. It only happens at various times
I was wondering
of the year.
about that.
Matt Golding has the coalition operating room here. Now public service, we're just going to make 36,000 cuts, but I won't tell you where until after the operation.
Just relax, and whatever you do, don't woke up.
Don't woke up.
And there's a few consultants viewing outsourcing gas.
Yeah.
Service delivery, blip, 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 beautiful.
Matt Bissett-Johnson, if you think nuclear energy is a bad idea, what do you see what we're not talking about after the election? It's their Project 2020, shh.
Yep, you know, you should always look behind.
Yeah. Run us through this, Kathy.
We've had a stern warning from the Coalition about the sorts of nasty stuff that happens on X.
Peter Dutton is warning us about the dangers of unchecked nationalism, propaganda and racism on X.
Well, is that the same Peter Dutton who also warns us of the dangers of African gangs, Lebanese Muslim migrants, job stealing refugees, divisive woke Indigenous communists? So he's a very broad church brush. Kind of warning you against things.
President Trump is talking about America a lot, but he's also talking about Gaza now.
He had already observed that Gaza was looking unlivable.
Yeah.
And for anyone who wanted to interpret that as thinking that he wanted to make it more livable for the Palestinians, that was apparently the error of their thinking.
How it started, safe zone here, and how it's going, development opportunities.
With glorious beachfront location, best weather, golf, 100% cleansed of terrorists, sympathisers, relations. So peaceful, so safe.
Yep.
And you just have to contact the Trump empire.
Yeah, Gaza Largo.
Yes.
Beautiful, Matt Goldie. From the river to the Riviera, Palestine will be mine.
Well, you know, to the man with a hammer, every problem is a nail. To the man with a real estate penchant, there we go.
Everything's an opportunity.
Yeah. Ooh.
David, Netanyahu and Trump, the Gazan Riviera, wish you weren't here. Postcards from the edge.
Yes, it's quite the edge, and it's got a few grueling details, like the odd...
Some leftovers from the previous
bombs.
Occupants. The Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, says he won't comment on a daily basis about Trump, but is this just, as Brett Lethbridge points out here, just fence sitting?
Gosh, it's a hard one, Mike, because it's all about a four-dimensional chess game. I'm more of the, better to die on your feet than live on your knees kind of thing, which is clearly a very different sort of a position. And that I should not expect that the politician is going to say the same sorts of things that I would say.
Right. My position on Trump remains unchanged. I shall sit on this spiky fence.
Yeah. Well, we just hope he's right. We hope he's right.
Yeah. It's been a great pleasure unpicking events this week. I'll let you do the honours.
Okay. And it's back to you, David.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Mike. Let's get some final observations. Sam.
Well, saving the best for last. News you can use. How the government thinks they're going to get the Libs over the line on the electoral donations. They want to take the donation cap from $20,000 to $40,000. Put also up the disclosure thing from $1,000 to $5,000, so they think they can get the coalition over the line by making that a bit more generous, and then keep the per electorate spend at $800,000. See what happens.
See if that's the deal.
How do you know Niki won't be best for last?
Well, no, I mean I'm saving my best.
Her
best will be better.
It's not a competition.
Yeah.
It is a little bit. The coalition, at senior levels of the opposition, there's growing worry about how many people inside the party think they're going to win, and expectations management.
Right.
And they're trying to send the message out that...
They need to learn to read polls.
Yeah, that Dutton, even if you win 7, 8, 9 seats, it's still a good election for one term. You'll note when, and just on some shadow ministers who are getting ahead of themselves and thinking about departmental secretaries, when Dutton did his frontbench reshuffle, he didn't guarantee that that would be the team that is the cabinet. And people around Dutton are starting to think about what a cabinet looks like. And there's a couple of people in the shadow cabinet who are well and truly on the chopping block.
Interesting. Niki?
Okay, so this year marks the 50th anniversary of the dismissal of the Whitlam government by Sir John Kerr. So anyone who was there on that momentous day, if they go to the Old Parliament House website, which is moadoph.gov.au, and taps in, were you at the 1975 dismissal, you can register and maybe get invited to a few special events. Full disclosure, I'm on the board of Old Parliament House and I was actually there on that day. And finally, the Today Show regular political segment on Fridays is up in the air because Dutton is refusing to appear with Annika Wells, and he said that he wants only Richard Marles. And surely that couldn't be because he's afraid to front up with a woman.
That was best for last.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. Thank you all very much for joining us this morning. Finally, there was once a time when Pauline Hanson could command the nation's attention. These days, it's a little different. We'll leave you with that. Thanks for watching.
My colleague and I, Senator Malcolm Roberts, are pleased to announce our policy on behalf of One Nation for the people of Australia. This is about Australia's future. It's about putting money back into the pockets of Australians. It's about slashing government waste. And it's about tax reform and spending that the major political parties will never do. Thank you. Any questions? All right. No one has a question.
You're making us all feel very excited about being here.